The Oilers don't always play defense, but when they do, they're probably going to win. What's cracking, everybody, and welcome back to Kraken R&R, where things are starting to slip away from the Seattle Kraken again. The Kraken end up falling 5-3 to the Edmonton Oilers in a game that, honestly, I think the box score makes it look quite a bit different than it actually feels throughout the course of it. But before we can even get to the game, we have to get caught up on the things that happened over the last couple of days and honestly the last couple of hours before this game actually gets started. Almost all of which is COVID related, as earlier in the week we learned that the Calgary Flames, who were already having games postponed the last time Seattle played, were going to have their return to play date pushed back until at least after the Christmas break. It could be longer, who knows at this point, but this does include the game that the Kraken were going to play against the Flames, their first meeting on the 23rd. The Flames, though, are just one of 5 teams the NHL has already shut down until after Christmas, and there's still plenty of time for more teams to be added to that list, as just earlier today, a few hours before the game, we found out that the Toronto Maple Leafs were also going to join that list, which means that the game Seattle was going to play against them tomorrow as part of the second back-to-back in a row that Seattle was going to play is also going to be postponed. And I mean, reason for it aside, on the one hand, Seattle does now catch a bit of a break not having to play those 2 back-to-backs one right after the other, but it still is a bit of a bummer to see games postponed that we were looking forward to, and they're still going to be making those games up later, which does mean that we could see more back-to-backs down the road. Oh, but we're not done talking about COVID just yet, as with this game specifically, by the time puck drops, there's 9 players in COVID protocol between the two teams, 5 for the Oilers and 4 for the Kraken, with Ryan Nugent-Hopkins being added the same day for the Oilers, and just a couple of hours before game time, Jamie Oleksiak gets added to the 4-player now list for the Kraken. Now, the NHL is not the only league dealing with COVID issues, as both the NFL and NBA are dealing with issues of their own, and there's been games postponed and pushed back there as well. Plus, for what it's worth, thanks in large part to the fact that all but 1 player in the NHL are vaccinated, the cases that the NHL has had, for the most part, have been very little to no symptoms for those players that have gotten it. Still though, as the problem continues to spread across the league, the NHL has to get something figured out and do it quickly. At this point, it seems like they're pretty much just pushing it off until after the Christmas break, but they really need to get on this one fast and stop just pushing the problem down the road. Of course, what that solution looks like at this point could be any range of things. They could go more the NFL route and be a little bit more lenient for vaccinated players, especially considering the vaccination rate within the league of the NHL itself, or they could go the other direction and pause the season for a couple weeks to get this figured out, which then does throw into question whether or not they actually end up going to the Olympics. Whatever they decide to do though, again, it just needs to happen sooner rather than later, as with things the way they are right now, they're pretty much just leaving some teams out to dry, in some cases even having teams having to play a player down due to cap issues and having too many players either injured or in the COVID protocol, which was the case for the Oilers tonight, who were playing a man down. Amidst all this chaos though, we still do have a game that gets played, and as we start things off in the first period, it's Edmonton who gets off to the good start with a lot of control in the Kraken end, and really doing a good job of shutting down any chances that Seattle has to try to get things going the other way. Drieger, who is in net for this game, a decision that I think they made before they knew they weren't going to be playing the Leafs tomorrow. Either way, it's still probably the right one to give Grubauer a little extra rest after he got banged up a bit against the Ducks. He is able to give the Kraken some early saves, something that on the other end, the Oilers don't get from Skinner. As in spite of how this game's gotten started and all the momentum for the Oilers early on, it's the Kraken who get on the board first, with a rare push into the offensive zone by Geekie, who drops it for Donato, also looking for a pass. He doesn't find one, so he just decides to shoot it. And wouldn't you know it, sometimes if you shoot the puck, it goes in. It does come on the first shot on goal for the Kraken, and while at first it did look like Skinner made the save, it manages to sneak through his armpit, leak past him, and get across the line to give the Kraken the early lead. And then after Drieger makes a nice save on a dangerous play created by Connor McDavid, the Kraken start to build some momentum in their favor and finally get a little bit of sustained time in the offensive zone, Though this does not take too long to convert either, as Eberle behind the net makes a beautiful chef's kiss of a pass backhand right out in front of the net to McCann, who roofs it into the back of the net, and early on the Kraken now have a 2-goal lead. For McCann, it's his now tied for the team lead 12th goal of the season, as he continues to make his case to get a nice contract by the end of the season to stay with the Kraken, as he is due a new one, unless they want to lose him in free agency, which they just cannot let happen. And again, at this point in the game, the Kraken are still getting outshot, outhit, and definitely losing in possession time, as this game is starting to look like one of those that turns into a big head scratcher for those of us that like looking at stats. Unfortunately, as we get into the back half of the first period, the Oilers are eventually able to refine and regain that momentum that they had early on, and this time they're able to make it count, as a hard shot from the blue line by Bouchard isn't picked up in time by Drieger and finds the back of the net to pull the Oilers to within one. Shortly after, though, the Kraken are trying to respond quickly with a nice passing play on a rush chance that gets the puck to Johansson, who takes the shot, it gets past Skinner, and it hits not one, but both posts and stays out. Then, next thing you know, Lauzon's headed to the box on a BS roughing call that sends the Oilers to the power play. The Seattle penalty kill does a good job early on against what is still the best power play in the NHL, eventually even getting Tanev on a partial break going the other way with a shorthanded chance, but Skinner's able to save it and then going right back in the other direction before they can get reset up in the defensive zone. A rebound gets to Foegele, who is able to find the back of the net to tie things up. Don't worry though, the Kraken would soon get a second chance to prove themselves on the penalty kill, as next it's Soucy to the box for cross-checking. Fortunately, this time the Kraken are successfully able to kill off the entire power play, and we get to the end of the first with the score still tied at 2, even with the Oilers outshooting the Kraken nearly 3-1 with 20 shots in the first period, which is the most the Kraken have given up in a single period, and also almost more than they've given up in a handful of games. The play in the second period is much more even and back and forth, with the shots on goal and possession time being pretty even between the two teams, especially compared to the first period, through about the first 8 minutes or so. Eventually, Edmonton is able to get off a pretty strong push on the Kraken end, something that comes about due in large part to what was easily the most entertaining part of this portion of the game. McCann blocks a shot with his skate, which knocks the blade of his skate free, basically leaving him with just one useful foot, and desperately trying to get back to the Kraken bench. He's got one knee on the ice and is pushing off with the other skate, just trying to slide over to the Kraken bench, which is unfortunately not only on the other side of the ice widthways, but also the other side of center ice because it's the second period. I mean, yes, it puts the Kraken in a bit of an unfortunate situation, with Edmonton now basically on a power play until McCann can get to the bench and Seattle can get another guy on the ice. But still, I gotta say, if there has ever been a point yet to this point in the season where I really, really wish I could show game footage in these videos, it would probably be this one. Unfortunately, there are copyrights, which are a mess and a whole headache to try and get around, so I can't show game footage in these videos, but I will try to find a highlight on Twitter or something like that and put it there if you want to see it at some point later. Fortunately, because the Kraken are able to survive the resulting Edmonton push, we can look back and have a laugh at what, having watched every minute of Kraken hockey so far, I think I can safely say is the funniest thing that I've seen in one of their games to this point. I mean, it's either this or the laces getting caught up between Dunn and one of the Edmonton players that saw their skates tied together in that first meeting between these two teams. I guess there's just some sort of weird mojo between these teams. Right after the Kraken do survive this situation, which really only happens thanks in large part to a couple big saves by Drieger, they get their first and what would be their only power play of the game. And this power play only doesn't end up scoring itself because of a big save by Skinner on the other side. Easily, this one is the save of the game. The Kraken power play did have some trouble getting going, and even gives up a 2-on-1 chance shorthanded going the other way that Drieger once again has to come up big to stop on that end, before the Kraken get their big chance on the other side, which is Schwartz to Eberle all the way across to McCann, who takes a beautiful shot that Skinner is somehow able to get all the way back across the net to get a glove on and keep out. Coming out of the Kraken power play, it's back to the tight, evenly fought game between these two teams that we'd seen for the majority of the second period to this point. However, a couple minutes later, chaos in front of the Kraken net and a bouncing puck does allow the puck to find its way past Drieger and into the net, as Edmonton has come all the way back from down 2-0 to take the lead with 3 unanswered goals. Seattle is able to respond with some light pressure, and after a couple more good scoring chances for McCann are shut down just short, Lauzon, with a beautiful shot from the blue line, is able to beat Skinner, and for the second time in the game, he is saved by the post behind him. But this time, it's not for long, as it rebounds right out to Susie, who is able to find the mostly empty net and get it in before Skinner can recover and get back to the other side. The Kraken are able to tie this one up 3-3 as we get to the second intermission. The third period does start out being played about the same way that the second was for the majority of it, with play being pretty back and forth, but around the 5-minute mark of the third, Edmonton starts to take control, and for the Kraken, it's pretty much all downhill from there. The Kraken, for the most part, are doing a good job of defending the Oiler onslaught, and Drieger is a wall in net. Eventually, though, it's just one chance too many for Edmonton, as a puck that takes a few weird bounces to end up going over Drieger's head goes off Fogel's shoulder in front of the net and into it behind Drieger to give Edmonton the lead. Well, I should say that it doesn't give them the lead right away, as immediately this is waved off on the ice. However, it ends up going to review, and they determine that it's a good goal, as Gio pushes Fogel into Drieger and the puck ends up going into the net with him. So they call it a good goal, and Edmonton has the lead, and they won't give it up. For pretty much the entirety of the remaining 11 minutes of the game, Edmonton is content with just playing defense and icing this one away, which ultimately they're successful in doing in spite of not necessarily being a team known for defense and also being a man down. Either way, Seattle just can't get anything going offensively, even after they have a couple of traded minors that get them to 4-on-4, and then they pull Drieger to make it 5-on-4, but it's still not enough, and Edmonton, with Connor McDavid, do find the empty net to finish this one off, giving us the final score of 5-3. With this game as a whole, honestly, I didn't feel like the Kraken played a terrible game, at least especially not defensively. In fact, defensively, I think they played a pretty fantastic game, especially considering the relentless offensive pressure that the Oilers were getting for at least 2 periods of it. The big problem for the Kraken in this one, and what ultimately ends up being their downfall, is that they just couldn't get anything going offensively, and certainly not in a consistent manner to build any kind of momentum in their favor. It was a greater problem for the Kraken in this one that was built from a few different things that they were struggling with, probably the biggest of which being turning over the puck consistently in the neutral zone, not allowing them to get through there into the offensive zone and set up, get control, and get that sustained pressure and shots off on goal that you need to try to get consistent goal scoring. And even when they were able to get the puck into the offensive zone, they just were not able to win very many of those puck battles along the boards to maintain possession, which is gonna cause some trouble, especially for a team like the Kraken that seem to like to get into those puck battles and try to come out on top of them. And it certainly didn't help that Edmonton was not giving them very much space at all, playing very much up in the Kraken's face while they were on offense, which is something that we've seen the Kraken pretty consistently struggle to get through on the offensive end in a number of games now, as this seems to be the MO against them to shut down their offense. Also, speaking of things that didn't help the Kraken in this one, Edmonton definitely got the better of the officiating in this one as well. There weren't really any terrible calls, unless you want to count the first one on Lauzon, but it was definitely a night where anything that could go one way or the other was all going Edmonton's way, and while there's no one big call that looks bad, it's just a lot of little things that build up to kind of having a frustrating feeling to this one, even if in the end I think it's pretty fair to say that the team that played better won the game. Outside of losing the game, the other potential bad news for the Kraken coming out of this one is that late in the game, Tanev also goes down with an awkward hit along the boards, his legs getting taken out from under him. He is very slow to get up and even slower getting to the bench and doesn't end up returning to the game. There's no call on the play, so the Kraken don't end up getting another power play, and we're just left sitting, crossing our fingers, hoping that Tanev isn't going to be out for too long, or, I mean, hopefully not out for any time at all, but it really didn't look good in the moment. However, with all that having been said, since it is the holiday season, I want to finish this one off on a good note, and there were a number of Kraken players that I thought had very good games in this one. And for that, we have to start with Chris Driedger, who does see 41 shots against him, one of the biggest shot totals that the Kraken have allowed, especially considering there were only 17 shots going the other way, which is one of the lowest shot totals they've had. For Driedger, though, he does stop 36 of 40 shots that he faces, which, while that's only good for a 900 save percentage, that isn't necessarily fantastic. I think you could make the argument that he stopped 37 of the 40, with one of those being pushed in off of Fogel's shoulder. Either way, 900 is still a better save percentage than any of the Kraken goaltenders have to this point in the season, so I think we'll take it. Beyond Driedger, again, the Kraken played fantastic defensively, but some standout players I think are certainly Vince Dunn, Jared McCann on the forward end, who was pretty much the Kraken offense in this game, as well as Jordan Eberle, who has 2 assists, and Ryan Donato, who had a very strong first period, including that leading goal. And now, for the team as a whole, it's a couple days rest, again with the Leafs game being postponed, before they, if everything goes to plan, which seems like a pretty big if at this point, take on the Arizona Coyotes on Tuesday for their last game before the Christmas break. It is a game that should be looked at as a good chance for this team to give all of us fans an early Christmas present with a win. I know there are some reasons to believe that it might not be such an easy win for the Kraken, but in the spirit of the holidays, we're just gonna pretend that this is the first time that these two teams are meeting. Yeah. With that though, we have finally reached the end of this one, so if you have made it to this point, thank you very much for watching. If you did like or enjoy this video, there are buttons for that kind of stuff down below to help support the channel, and I'd love to hear your thoughts down in the comments section. And until that Arizona game, if indeed it does happen, stay safe out there, be good to each other, happy holidays, and go Kraken.